Have you ever looked up at the sun and just felt awestruck by the sheer power of it? It's like this massive fiery giant just pouring out energy. And I always find myself wondering, could we ever actually harness that energy on a scale large enough to do something really ambitious? Like what if we could use it to, I don't know, travel to other stars?
That's a question that has fascinated, well, pretty much everyone who's ever thought about it.
Yeah.
And it leads to one of those big ideas that we see in both science and science fiction, the Dyson sphere.
And this isn't some far out fringe idea. I mean, we can trace this back to a 1937 novel, Star Maker, by Olaf Stapledon. But then it was Freeman Dyson in 1960 who kind of gave it a more, I guess you could say, a more scientific foundation.
Right. And for this deep dive, we're going deeper than just the basic idea of, a structure surrounding a star. We've got some really interesting recent research that looks specifically at what they call a photovoltaic Dyson sphere. It's this concept of like a massive array designed to, well, basically catch sunlight and convert it into electricity. On a scale, I mean, it's almost impossible to grasp how big we're talking. So today we're going to be exploring the science behind this, the possibilities, but also the obstacles. And we've got some, I think, some surprising things in this new study.
Yeah, this research really goes deep into some key areas, like how would something like that even regulate its own temperature? What would a structure like that around our sun even mean for Earth? And, well, how much material would we need? How much stuff would it take to actually build something that big?
Right. So the first thing we need to do is answer the most basic question. What exactly is a Dyson sphere?
I mean, in the simplest terms, it's this, well, hypothetical megastructure. The idea is that it completely surrounds a star, in our case the sun, and captures pretty much all the energy it radiates. Picture a shell or maybe a swarm of collectors completely encasing the star.
And that brings us to something called the Kardashev scale. It's, think of it like a yardstick, but for civilizations. It measures how advanced a civilization is based on how much energy they can use. And a civilization that could build a Dyson sphere and use all the energy from its star, well, that would be a Type 2 civilization. Just to give you an idea, we're not even a Type I yet.
It really makes you feel pretty small, doesn't it? But this specific type of Dyson sphere we're talking about today, the photovoltaic one, it doesn't just absorb energy as heat. The idea is that it converts that sunlight directly into electricity, kind of like solar panels, but on a truly astronomical scale.
Now, whenever you're talking about a structure that's designed to absorb that much energy, you run into a big challenge.
Yep.
Heat. Our sources really get into this, and they talk about the difference between what we call a black body, something that absorbs and emits all radiation perfectly, and a gray body. Gray bodies, like semiconductors, well, they absorb and emit radiation based on their specific energy properties, what we call their band gap energy.
Okay, so try to picture this. We build our Dyson sphere out of a semiconductor, this gray body material. It absorbs a ton of sunlight, but it can't release that energy as heat as efficiently as a black body would. And here's where it gets interesting. That limited ability to get rid of heat, well, it means the sphere would get really hot, especially if it's a smaller sphere.
Yeah, and that's really important because for these photovoltaic cells to work right, they need to be kept relatively cool. But a simple gray body Dyson sphere, if it's too small, well, we just get way too hot, and then generating electricity efficiently, forget it. It's like trying to run your laptop in direct sunlight without any fans or anything. It would just overheat and stop working.
So the research suggests this really clever solution. They call it a black-coated photovoltaic Dyson sphere. So imagine, on the inside, you have the semiconductor, and that's converting the sunlight to electricity. But on the outside, well, you've got this layer of black material. And this acts more like a black body, so the sphere can radiate heat much more effectively. And that keeps the operating temperature down so the solar cells can actually function. It really shows how important material science is, even for theoretical megastructures. It all comes down to basic physics in the end.
Yeah, exactly. So by using this approach, you can harness the good parts of semiconductors for converting energy, and you can also handle all that heat with the black body coating. It's a really neat theoretical solution.
And our source also talks about how efficient a sphere like this could be at converting sunlight into electricity. They call this the radiative efficiency limit. And it turns out it's tied to two things: the band gap of the semiconductor material and the size of the sphere. And apparently, there's a sweet spot. The best efficiency is around a band gap of 1.3 electron volts. Think of an electron volt as, well, a tiny unit of energy. And the band gap, it's like an obstacle course for sunlight, and the energy from the sunlight has to get over this obstacle to free up electrons. A band gap of 1.3 eV is like having that obstacle at just the right height so most of the sunlight can get over it.
Understanding that limit is really important when we're trying to figure out how much energy we could actually get from a
Mhm.
structure like this. It's not just about catching all the light, it's about how well we can turn that light into something useful.
Okay, but let's bring this back down to earth for a second.
Yeah.
What would building something like this even do to our planet?
Well, that's a really important question. And the study looks at different scenarios. They talk about a small Dyson sphere, which would be built inside Earth's orbit, and a large one outside of Earth's orbit.
In a small one, well, that doesn't sound so good, does it? If you put a Dyson sphere between the Earth and the sun, it would block all the sunlight we need. And because the sphere wouldn't be as hot as the sun, any light that did get through would be really different. It would be mostly infrared light.
And that would be really bad for life as we know it. Photosynthesis, which is how plants and other organisms use light to make energy, well, that needs visible light. With mostly infrared light, photosynthesis would basically stop. Plus, the light would be all diffused. It wouldn't have that direct intensity that we're used to.
So a small Dyson sphere is out of the question if we want to keep life on Earth going. But what about a bigger one further out? Would that be better?
Well, it wouldn't be an instant disaster, but it would still have a big impact. Even if the Dyson sphere was just outside of Earth's orbit, it would make the Earth's temperature go way up. The study says it could increase by 140 Kelvin. That would make the Earth uninhabitable.
Wow, that really puts things into perspective, right? I mean, we worry about global warming and a few degrees of change, but the study also looks at what would happen if the Dyson sphere was much further away.
Right. The further away it is, the cooler it would be. And that means it wouldn't heat the Earth up as much. If you put the Dyson sphere way out at Saturn's orbit, that's about 9.5 times further from the sun than the Earth is, well, then the temperature on Earth would only go up by about 3 Kelvin.
Okay, so 3 Kelvin, that might not sound like a lot. But think about it. The study makes this really interesting comparison to global warming. A change of 3 Kelvin is what we could see with some of the worst case scenarios for greenhouse gas emissions.
And that's where this whole theoretical idea of a Dyson sphere becomes relevant to us right now. The study says before we even think about building a Dyson sphere, we have to figure out how to control a planet's temperature. Because if we can't do that, building a Dyson sphere would completely destroy the Earth.
And that's basically the same problem we're facing right now with climate change. So it's like this giant theoretical project is telling us we need to solve our own environmental problems first.
Exactly. The technology and the cooperation that we need to fix global warming, which, by the way, also involves using more solar energy here on Earth. That's like the first step towards becoming the kind of civilization that could even think about building a Dyson sphere.
Okay, let's put the temperature aside for a minute. What about the materials? How much stuff would we actually need to build this thing? That sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It's a project on an unbelievable scale. The study focuses on silicon. It's what we use in solar cells today. And the good news is there's a lot of it in the solar system. They estimate about 1.3 times 10 to the 27th kilograms.
That's hard to even imagine. But is that enough to, like, build a sphere around the sun?
They calculated that to make a full Dyson sphere out to Saturn's orbit, you'd need about 1.2 times 10 to the 25th kilograms of silicon. That's only about 1% of all the silicon in the solar system, but it's still more than 10 times what's on Earth or Venus. So yeah, building a full Dyson sphere out of just silicon, it's a really big challenge just to get all the material.
That would put a strain on, like, the entire solar system's resources, so maybe a partial Dyson sphere would be more realistic, at least for now.
Yeah, the research looked at that too. They imagined a partial Dyson sphere, not a full sphere, at a distance of 2.13 astronomical units. That's between Mars and the asteroid belt. If you covered about 22% of the surface area at that distance with solar cells, you'd need about 1.3 times 10 to the 23rd kilograms of silicon.
Wait, that sounds familiar.
That's about how much silicon scientists think is on Mars. So it's still a huge project. You'd have to mine and transport material on a planetary scale. But it's possible, at least in theory, using resources from other places in our solar system.
Okay, so let's say we build this partial Dyson sphere. How much power are we talking about? Would it even be worth all the effort?
It would be a lot of power. Even this partial sphere, capturing just 4% of the sun's energy, would generate about 15.6 yottawatts of electricity. To give you an idea, that's more energy in a few seconds than humanity uses in an entire year. The study even talks about using that energy to power interstellar spacecraft. Like, they give an example of accelerating a 1,000-ton spacecraft to almost the speed of light in less than a second. You could even use it for terraforming projects, really huge ones. So the energy you could get is just mind-blowing.
In silicon, that wouldn't be the only thing you'd need, right?
Right. The study also mentions other things you'd need, like carbon. You could use that for coatings to help regulate temperature, and also for the electrical contacts in the solar arrays. They even talk about the possibility of making solar cells almost entirely out of carbon in the future.
Now, with a project this big, you have to ask, is it worth it? Is the energy you get out more than the energy you put in to build it? That's what we call energy return on investment, or EROI.
Right, and the study looked at the EROI for this partial Dyson sphere using silicon. They considered building the solar cells here on Earth and transporting them to space, and also mining and processing the silicon directly on Mars.
So what did they find? Would it actually be efficient?
It actually looks pretty good, especially if you use resources from Mars. This is because they're thinking of using really thin solar cells in space, and because they'd be getting constant sunlight. Even with the cost of transporting everything, it seems like you get a good return on your energy investment, especially compared to solar power systems here on Earth.
Okay, so let's try to sum all this up. We've talked about a lot today, from science fiction to some really specific scientific ideas about a photovoltaic Dyson sphere.
We've seen how the idea of harnessing all the energy of a star is incredibly appealing, but we've also seen that there are some really big challenges, like how to deal with all that heat and how to get enough materials to build something that large.
And maybe the biggest takeaway from all of this is that, well, the study makes this connection between building a Dyson sphere and solving climate change. They're both really hard problems, but they both require us to get really good at controlling the temperature of a planet.
Yeah, if we want to become the kind of civilization that could build a Dyson sphere, we need to learn how to fix global warming. And that means developing new technology, working together globally, and, well, it also means using a lot more solar energy here on Earth.
So, we've talked about this massive, complex project, this Dyson sphere, but when you think about it, it really highlights how important it is to take care of our own planet. Before we even dream of harnessing the energy of other stars, we have to protect the Earth. That's our home, and it's our responsibility to make sure it stays healthy and livable for generations to come.